Tune in every Friday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a weekly segment of the worst mainstream media headlines of the week. They tell us what's behind the worst, most misleading, and funniest headlines from around the news with Steve Patt of the blog Left Eye on the News. Together, they pull apart the corporate media's bias, spin, and downright lies. Tune in this Friday and every Friday for the worst and most misleading headlines of the week.
Fault Lines.
We are back. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan. The show to listen to this morning, talking about this claim by Western intelligence that the Iranians shot down the Ukrainian jetliner that crashed, killing 176 people. Joining us now, great guest, very knowledgeable on all things Syrian especially, but she knows a lot about the region in general. Also the Palestinian situation. Vanessa Beeley is joining us. Hey, Vanessa, how you doing?
Hi, guys. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's first start. We got you for a couple segments. I just would like you to boast about yourself for a second, Vanessa. Tell people your resume on dealing with Middle East issues. How long you've been covering it? What you've covered? That you've traveled over there. Just for people who might not be familiar with your great work, tell people who you are and what you've done on this subject.
Well, basically, I started out in 2012 heading to Egypt and Gaza. I spent a total of around 3 months in Gaza itself during the Israeli bombing in 2012. And then I was in Egypt for much of 2013. I've covered situation in Iraq, in Yemen extensively since 2015 when the Saudi war of aggression broke out in March. And I'm now pretty much based in Syria, in Damascus, a country I've been visiting since 2016 and covering events extensively on the ground, from the front lines in areas like Eastern Aleppo, in Idlib, in Eastern Ghouta, in Dara, etc., and just trying to cover events from the ground rather than from an office in London, Washington, or New York.
Now, and when we talk about this claim by Western intelligence, what I said this morning was, I believe, based on the history of U.S. intel agencies going back to the end of World War II when the CIA was formed, and the more recent history in the Middle East going back to at least 2012, and the extreme history, the present, the way they've handled this Iran situation all for years now, but also this current situation. I've said, I don't know what happened with the plane, but I do know that any claims made by Western media, the only logical way to deal with them is with extreme skepticism. So first off, do you agree with that? And second, is it clear to you that Western intel agencies have a very clear and provable history of lying over and over and over again when it comes to issues like this?
Yeah, I mean, my caution would be very much the same as yours, is don't believe a word that Western intelligence says. And that is almost 99.9%. Look, we've had the recent exposure of the corruption of the OPCW over the Duma chemical attacks with the stream of whistleblowing evidence that's come out, demonstrating exactly how the OPCW was coerced by its main sponsors, who are, of course, members of the coalition that are trying to effect regime change in Syria, to omit and to not include information which would have changed the nature of the report and would not have justified retrospectively the bombing of Syria before the OPCW had even been able to enter and carry out its investigation in Eastern Ghouta in Damascus. So, what we're seeing now, if we look at recent events, we're seeing the US losing its grip on its hegemony in the Middle East. We're seeing the unlawful assassination of two primary figures from both Iraq and Iran, Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, the leader of the PMF forces, the so-called Iranian proxies inside Iraq, but which are effectively indigenous Iraqi forces that were instrumental in the defeat of ISIS when the US didn't raise a weapon or fire a bullet at ISIS during that time. It was largely the PMF power multiplying the Iraqi army that was able to prevent the overtaking of Baghdad by ISIS forces. So the killing of the leader of this group is alongside the killing of Qasem Soleimani, who was also instrumental in fighting ISIS in the region and the other terrorist groups, was the start of this incredible story that is now being put out by Western intel agencies. And what we're actually seeing, I believe, is a distraction from the fact that the US and its partners among the NATO member states are losing their grip in the region. Effectively, we saw an Iranian airstrike on a US-occupied base in Iraq, which was eminently successful, pinpoint precision, caused casualties. This is very, very important. According to Iranian intelligence, if you like, and according to other reports that are now surfacing in the region, casualties were caused and deaths were caused by these strikes, which of course Trump is trying desperately to cover up. And then we see this emerging story of this passenger jet being brought down somehow. Initially, Reuters and all of the mainstream media were basically putting out a uniform, it's a technical failure. Suddenly, this was switched to it's being brought down by missiles. Then, of course, they have to be Iranian missiles. Now,
and Russian missiles, yeah.
Story. Yeah, well, yeah.
But hey, Garland, I want to point out one thing she's saying that's super important. My friend Kelly pointed this out yesterday. Let's talk about the OPCW for one quick second. The OPCW investigation about the chemical weapons attack in Syria has completely fallen apart. WikiLeaks has put out information. We have firsthand testimony. It's completely fallen apart. Why is that important? Think about this, Garland. Everyone right now was saying, Trudeau was saying, we need an investigation into this crash. What we've learned is that these investigations can't even be trusted. You see,
are you going
to trust the investigation?
No, absolutely not. One of the things, Vanessa, that we've, I look right now in the media and I see CNN, Iran shot down plane with 2 Russian-made missiles.
Yeah.
U.S. official says. So, they've left out the word Venezuela. I'm sure they worked hard to figure out how they could get Venezuela or maybe Cuba or Nicaragua into that sentence, but apparently it didn't work. But then they have video there. So when we look at this, Iran has said very early, we don't trust the West. So where are we now that anyone who's been paying attention is not going to trust these international bodies, whether it's the OPCW, et cetera? I think the OPCW is not, that's not the issue. That tells us something. So are we in a spot now where the Five Eyes countries, the Western countries, are going to push, for these international investigations, but everyone, here's what I'm thinking, everyone outside of this circle of Western kind of U.S. and their vassal states is not going to trust the OPCW or any of these international investigations anymore. Vanessa.
Well, no, I mean, and what I was just going to say is who is leading this vilification of Iran over this passenger jet crash? It's Maliki Brown of New York Times, who's produced another one of his spectacular animated visionary versions of the truth, tag teaming, of course, with Bellingcat. Now, this is exactly the same team that we had presenting evidence to us about the Douma chemical attack, which has now been utterly discredited. So the very fact that these two entities have entered into the fray immediately, and who supplied them with the video evidence is a guy called Nariman Garib. Now, Garib has multiple connections to the US State Department. So here we have this nice little cartel of evidence producing, right, coming from exactly the same individuals and the same entities that were producing it previously against Syria. So clearly this is a vilification program, but what I'm asking is, what do they hope to achieve? The fact that Iran is being accused of bringing down a passenger jet that was carrying Iranians on the night that it targeted a U.S. occupying base in Iraq. Who does this benefit?
Well, let me ask you,
we have to come back to this typical stories. Like, who is this benefiting? It's certainly not benefiting Iran to do so, even by mistake. The missiles were launched to some kilometers west of Tehran.
well, let me ask you
This
this.
was a scheduled flight.
Let me ask you this, Vanessa,
Sorry.
and I'm not going to say it's intentional or it's not intentional, but here's the other part. When you look at this, the whole overall story, right? The U.S. and its allies were, particularly the U.S., not forget its allies, the U.S. was looking really bad with the Soleimani strike.
Yeah.
The Iranians had the moral high ground, and when you're looking at this, the focus was the Soleimani strike, what was going on in the U.S., et cetera. What this has done, I'm not going to say it was or wasn't intentional, but one of the things this has done
What wasn't?
well, I'm going to get to it. This story coming out as it is with the accusations. And it has redirected the focus. And again, I'm not saying it's intentional. It has redirected the focus from what the U.S. did, from the, I would say, the foreign policy victory of the Iranians to what's going on here. Did the Iranians do something good or bad? That's a question. I'm not saying it's intentional, but it did.
No, wait, but that's okay. So you can keep being skeptical. I'm going to be less skeptical. It is absolutely no accident, I think, that this narrative changes the Ukrainian story. Right in the middle of Ukraine Gate, right in the middle of all of that. And the reason they're saying the thing you're pointing out about the Russian missile. And also, here's the thing. Like Vanessa pointed out, 2 days ago, that when we did the show yesterday, Western intelligence was not saying this. It was like, it's an accident, it's a technical problem, that's what it is. Now, not only does the story come out, I want you to notice, I don't know if you're where are you right now, Vanessa? Are you in Syria or are you in the
I'm in Damascus.
But see, my point was this serves a valuable purpose for them to distract and to change the narrative. What I'm saying is to change the narrative on a couple of things. On Iran, on Ukraine, it's valuable.
On Russia?
I'm always ready to say this. I'm never going to say it is or isn't intentional, because sometimes it's intentional and sometimes something happens and they look at it and they say, that's the perfect opportunity for us to grab this narrative and distract.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the U.S. shot down the plane. I'm saying they changed their story. And the amazing thing about it is there's complete media consensus in a couple of hours. Suddenly, this is the accepted narrative. But let me tell you one other thing, Garland. And Vanessa, you know about this story too. Let me tell you one other thing that this narrative helps with. Remember a few years ago, the United States shot down an Iranian passenger plane and killed about 300 people. This narrative, and people never talk about that.
But it's been coming up lately. See, that's the other thing. People have been bringing that up lately. That gets them to get out from Vanessa.
Well, wait, Vanessa, we're about to go to a break here. We're about to go to a break. So when we come back, we want to talk about your experience with the militias, these Iranian militias, and what you know about that. But I just want to make sure, because we have like a minute left or something like that.
Less than that. There we go. There's the music.
I warned you. See, Garland?
Coming right back, we are talking with Vanessa Beeley. You're listening to the most disruptive radio show in the Milky Way galaxy. It's Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM, your morning drive time radio show for news and entertainment in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We're talking with international investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley. You can follow her on Twitter at Vanessa Beeley. And, of course, she has her Patreon page, patreon.com/Vanessa Beeley. So, something, Vanessa, that people have been talking about a lot, and I know you can tell us a bit. We're hearing about these militias. And so in the West, we think of the military. It's pretty cut and dried. They're directly under the government, operated from the government. But in some of these Middle Eastern states, they have these paramilitary groups. They have militias that are integrated or not integrated in the military. Talk to us about the Iraqi militias, what you know about them, and describe it in a way that Americans can understand the difference between what's going on there and how we do things.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, one of the leaders who was assassinated by Trump's drone strike was Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes. Al-Mohandes is not his real name. That actually means the engineer. He has an engineering background. He led the PMU, or the PMF, Popular Mobilization Forces, which were claimed, again, to be an Iranian proxy. In reality, yes, they did have weapons supplied to them by Iran to enable them to combat ISIS. Now, I had the privilege to actually meet Mohandes in 2017. There was a group of us that went to Iraq as guests of Hashid al-Shabi. And we met with Mohandes. Now, the guy that I met with was, again, a very eloquent, a very intelligent, a very good strategist, somebody who understood the region, not only Iraq. And his version of events was that the US had not fired one bullet at the ISIS insurgents. The PMF, with the backing of Iran, he was very open about that, managed to hold back the ISIS advances, particularly into Baghdad. At one point, there was a very real danger that ISIS would overrun Baghdad. But what I want to make really clear here is that, the sectarian narrative that is used to describe these, as you call them, militias, I wouldn't call them militias because that suggests that they are not a legal entity. In fact, the PMF is now integrated into the Iraqi army, and very similar to Hezbollah, it's making its mark in the rebuilding and the restoration of Iraq after, of course, 30 years of occupation by the US, and after the attacks on Iraqi districts and areas by ISIS, which we know, of course, to be enabled and financed largely or promoted by the United States as one of its proxies in the region. And so therefore what we've seen is both these leaders, Qasem Soleimani and Mohandes in Iraq, Qasem Soleimani in the whole region, defending religious minorities. For example, Mohandes and the PMF were responsible for the defense of the Yazidis in Iraq when they came under really an ethnic cleansing attack by the ISIS terrorists. Soleimani in Syria, for example, and this is something that a lot of people don't know about, he was instrumental in the training and equipping of the National Defense Forces for the Syrian Christian towns on the border with Idlib, in particular in Mahade, a town that I've regularly visited. Soleimani and his troops were there to train, to reinforce, and to help the National Defense Forces defend and protect their own Christian towns, Syrian Christian towns, against the terrorists that were, of course, and are still being financed and promoted by the West, in particular in that area, Al-Qaeda. So both of these leaders, if you like, were instrumental in the fight against global terrorism, which of course is emanating from the US coalition in the region.
Vanessa, you've been following this, and I don't, get your comment on this and what you think. One of the things that I've been saying is, people have been talking as though that strike, the missile strike, which was largely symbolic, I think, and it was a show of force, a very, very successful show of force with Iranian military technology, but that it ain't over. That they've said we're going to work to drive them out of the region, and that add this: the Iraqi military, paramilitary, PMUs, whatever you want to call them, have said, well, wait a minute, we haven't got our comeuppance yet. We haven't gotten our revenge, and we're going to get our revenge. So the question becomes if and also the Iraqi prime minister is now saying to the Americans, give me your plan, let me know how you plan to leave. So in the event that the Iraqis say leave, the Americans don't leave, do you think we're looking at, something similar to what happened before when the U.S. occupied Iraq and there was roadside bombs and things like that? I mean, do you see that? What do you see in the future if these things kind of come together?
I think when we talked about the passenger jet crash being a distraction, I think you're absolutely right. It's a distraction from events in the region. Let's just very quickly try and recap on what happened. We know that Trump has lost face, or rather the US administration has lost face with the Iranian strikes on the US base in Iraq. At the same time, you're quite right, the PMF is looking for its own retaliation, and it is standing by its remit to remove US occupation from the region. And of course, as soon as the US is removed from Iraq, it's equally removed from Syria. It can't maintain a presence in Syria without its bases in Iraq. So this is a very important agenda on behalf of Iran and all aligned resistance nations and forces in the region. We saw immediately after the assassination of Soleimani and Mohandas the arrival of President Putin, unscheduled, in Damascus, where he toured various sites in Damascus with President Assad. This was a very, very, very strong message. We then had the release of conversations between the Iraqi Prime Minister and President Trump, where Trump clearly put pressure on the Prime Minister to cease trading and to cease development of the Belt and Road Initiative with China, even threatening the lives of the Prime Minister and other government members, and also instigating the protests in Iraq, firing on both security and protesters, a very familiar pattern. But these conversations have been released to show the extent to which Trump was trying to imprint his influence and the unipolarity on the region, particularly using Iraq as its base. So all of this is starting to fall apart. When Iran bombed the US base in Iraq, all of us here were bracing ourselves for an Israeli attack. Very important. Israel has gone quiet. Where is the bellicose rhetoric from Israel right now? I don't think it wants this war. I think it saw very quickly how Iran would respond and how efficiently Iran would respond. It saw very clearly that China and Russia moved in to support its allies and the non-aligned resistance axis in the region. It saw that Trump backed off very rapidly in his speech. Israel has gone quiet. You are not hearing war speech, hate speech from Israel right now.
And let me add this, I think, and that is that I think one of the things that Israel realized is, Iran, they've got these missiles that can hit us from long distance, and apparently the anti-aircraft, the U.S. Anti-aircraft defense batteries aren't very, very, very effective against them. But add this, their proxies are close by. If they've given those missiles to, the Hezbollah and to their proxies, which I'm guessing they have. If they haven't, they probably will now, then Israel would be defenseless against it. So I think it changes the game in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Vanessa, you made a point.
Absolutely.
You made a point that I really want to underline for people, because I went over to Lebanon in 2013. I saw this for myself. I interviewed people, and I was stunned by it, because in America, if you were to ask the average person even who follows the news, right? I think it's actually, Garland, I'm going to say this. I think you're actually worse off if you do follow the news. Americans have no idea what's going on in Syria and the Middle East, that the United States is backing Al-Qaeda. everybody in the U.S., if you were to take a poll about how popular Al-Qaeda is among American civilians, they not popular. No one likes Al-Qaeda, right? For good reason. No one likes Al-Qaeda or their affiliates, Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab or Al-Nusra or any of them. Ansar al-Sharia in Libya. No one likes them. But the big lie, and I think it is one of the biggest lies of this entire Middle Eastern situation, is that under the Obama administration and is continued under the Trump administration, is it 100% clear to you? This is why what you said about how they never fired a bullet at it. The hype here, Garland, if you listen to the news, is America fighting Al-Qaeda? That's
according to the news, yes.
And ISIS, when I mentioned Al-Qaeda, these Salafi, Wahhabist, Sunni extremist affiliates, I got to throw in ISIS as well.
We just killed their number 2 guy again yesterday, next week, the day before.
Right. We're always the media, but it's 100%. I mean, it's 100% clear to you. The U.S. is not only not fighting ISIS, not only not fighting Al-Qaeda, but is actually aiding them in staying in Syria. Is there anything there that I'm missing?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we've seen the recent extradition of ISIS fighters from Syria under the guise of the Turkish occupation, which enabled the United States to airlift ISIS fighters out of Syria and into Iraq, where, of course, they're going through another training program ready to be released back into Syria. The Al Tanif camp on the border with Jordan and the Rukban, so-called refugee camp, are recruiting and training grounds for ISIS and other extremist groups. And the US is using those ISIS elements in that area to run hit and run, basically, suicide bomb attacks in, for example, areas like Palmyra and Homs. So, you know, the ISIS, and I wouldn't really make much differentiation between ISIS and Al-Qaeda other than the funding arm. We know that Saudi Arabia is funding ISIS, Qatar and other Gulf states are funding Al-Qaeda. So, you know, the only difference really is in the financing stream. The difference in ideology is minimal. And both groups are proxies of the United States inside Syria and in the region.
Let me ask you this, Vanessa. I'm going to throw something out there that'll seem a little extreme, but I want your thoughts on it. Iran is the most powerful country in the world. Now, here's what I'm going to say. We now realize that they can wipe out the oil infrastructure in the Middle East, and there's nothing that the Western military technology can do to stop them anytime they want. The Western economy is done, and everyone now knows that. Am I being hyperbolic?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is a major, 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 major threat to our US unipolarity. And I think that is one of the regions, as I said, one of the reasons that Iraq, the Iraqi government was being targeted by Trump, because it was reaching out to become part of that initiative. And of course, that was what initially one of the reasons that led to the invasion of Syria, amongst others. And so therefore, I think what we're seeing now, as I've said before, is the loss of the US grip on global supremacy. And, you know, they're sliding down the mountain, trying to cling on by their fingernails. But as you pointed out, the Patriot missile system, air defense system, has had problems for a long time now. And there are no actual Patriot missile systems that I'm aware of around the US bases in Iraq, but they are in the Persian Gulf. But what we saw clearly last night was that America was very, very, we saw the soft underbelly. Not last night, sorry, the other night when Iran targeted the bases, we saw the US soft underbelly. They don't have the defenses necessary in place to prevent one of these attacks. And they don't have the defenses in place, for example, to withstand an attack by the PMF forces inside Iraq. And that's being demonstrated by other NATO member states removing their forces from Iraq. They're not stupid enough to stay there.
Now, Vanessa, we only got about 30 seconds left. So we were talking before about how the U.S. people are being lied to and fooled about U.S.'s support for Al-Qaeda. Are we fooling anybody in the Middle East? Because that was my experience, is that we're not fooling anybody. In your experience, being in the Middle East, traveling throughout there, do they know Americans are lying hypocrites? The American government, not Americans. the American government are lying hypocrites about this?
Well, I think what has happened, I mean, I think probably in Iraq is the one place where I would say 30 years of colonization by the United States has led to a kind of a hemorrhage of circumspection over the situation there. But what has basically happened, in my view, is the US has created a situation in which the Iranian proxies that they so fear have been required assistance for these countries to battle the terrorism that has been injected into these countries by the United States. So basically, the US coalition has opened the door to Iranian, and I put in inverted commas, expansion in the region. And with that expansion has come knowledge. So in Iraq, we've seen the rise of the PMF. We've seen the rise of information that has wakened people up to the US nefarious influence in the region. And that's why we're now seeing Iraq demand the exit of US troops from Iraq. The rest of the Middle East is fully aware of who is behind the destabilization process that's been ongoing for the last 9 years.
Vanessa Beeley, always great to have you on the show. Fantastic information you're not getting anywhere else. You are listening, and we'll have all Vanessa's information in the newsletter on social media. You want to follow her? You're listening to the show that is the antidote for propaganda, Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.